Welcome to the Sweet Slumber Podcast, the good, the bad, and the sleep deprived. I'm your host, Meredith Bruff. I'm here to teach you about my supportive, nurturing sleep solutions for infants and young children. We'll also be discussing the highs and lows of motherhood, what will help you feel whole and rested, and I'll explain what you can do now to help your little one thrive in every way for many years to come. I am excited to help you experience more fulfillment as a mother. Hello, everyone. Today I am sharing an interview with you. It's an interview that I had with sleep scientist and teacher Jessica Guy, where we discussed what's wrong with traditional sleep training. Before we begin the interview, I want to tell you about Jess. She is a developmental psychologist, a former sleep scientist, and certified infant and family sleep specialist. She is on a mission to spread the word about normal infant sleep, the power of nurture, and how to optimize parent and infant sleep and mental health using science and connection. I just love that. When she isn't educating about sleep, Jess is working at her other job in child development research, chasing her 2-year-old around, or more rarely, relaxing while listening to a podcast or audiobook at home in Melbourne, Australia. I am making this podcast series to educate parents about the popular but outdated practice of using cry it out and Verber. These techniques aren't a good fit for many babies, and they may have lasting consequences on infants and young children. Before you choose an approach for improving sleep, it's important to understand your child's needs and know how to meet those needs. This interview will help you make an informed decision about how to go about improving your little one's sleep. And a side note, my original recording of this interview had some technical problems. What you missed was some information about Jessica's concerns. She's concerned about the potential immediate and future consequences of teaching parents to stop being in tune with their children. She believes the habit extends beyond sleep training and sleep into the whole lifelong dyadic relationship. She's concerned that there is no research that examines this in a meaningful way. This is one of my concerns too. I've spoken with a couple of mothers who remember crying in their rooms when they were young for long periods, and no one attended to their needs. One of them reflected on her relationship with her parents and shared that she didn't feel like she could go to her parents when she needed them. This is a real problem, a habit of sorts that no parent would ever plan to fall into. So let's go ahead now and jump into the interview and hear more of Jessica's concerns about traditional sleep training.
And then the second main concern that I have, which I think we've sort of touched on a little bit throughout, but that is really just that parents are not aware of how sleep training works when it does work. So the marketing around sleep training and the claims around sleep training center on teaching baby to sleep, teaching baby independence, teaching them skills through this behavioral intervention, when we know that sleep training doesn't change the way babies sleep. It, doesn't have there's an observed difference in how they behave, and you could definitely attribute that to learning independence. But then when we look at what we know about how babies' brains develop and the areas of the brain that are necessary for true healthy self-regulation and emotional development, it's simply not possible to say we taught a baby to self-regulate in 2 weeks by stopping going to them when they asked for us. That's just absolutely not how brain development works. It is not developmentally possible or appropriate. There's some babies that they'll catch on super quick, and maybe they're just naturally a little bit more self-soothers. Maybe they're that sort of textbook easy baby. And it's difficult to know which babies it might be more harmful for or not harmful for. And I would even argue as well that even those quick responders, it seems more likely that it might not be an issue for them. But we also still don't know 100% because we don't have the research to sort of support it. And most of the research in sleep training around its efficacy does center on the parent reports, what the parents observed in terms of the behavior change. And so when we hear that sleep training is evidence-based in the sense that it improves sleep and also might improve parent mental health, that's what we need to keep in mind, is that it's evidence-based in bringing about a behavior change. But I don't think most parents know that. I think when parents are told there's evidence supporting this method for better sleep and better parent mental health, they assume, why wouldn't they? Because it is peer-reviewed research, that means that we know, like that scientists know that sleep training works to change sleep and sleep training isn't harmful. But if, I've read through a lot of the research and it's just not what it's saying. So there's what the research looked at and what the research is saying, and then there's what has been interpreted and what is put out there as what the sleep training research is saying. And those are they're two very different things. And that's a huge issue to me, because I think in the very least, parents need to be making an informed decision about what they're doing, and they need to know how what they're doing is working. And if that's still okay with them, if they're still willing to give it a shot, then, that's not any of my business or anybody's business, but that's not the case. Parents feel, and I talk to parents every day, that once they find out, they honestly feel like they were tricked, and they don't feel like they ever would have even considered it if they knew about biologically normal sleep, how babies' brains actually develop, how self-regulation develops, and how sleep training works. They wouldn't have done it. And so for me, it's sort of unconscionable that it is sold as something that it's not, because it's taking away parents, right to choose what's best for their baby.
Yeah, I love that. One of the things that was confusing to my client that I spoke about a little bit ago was that they are claiming that it's harmless, and that hasn't really been studied, right?
So there are a few studies that have looked at something like attachment maybe 12 months later, or there's another one that also looked at attachment and emotional outcomes, socio-emotional outcomes at around 5 years of age. But all of the studies that I'm aware of are very flawed, in the sense that, even so, the thing with sleep training research too is it's pretty hard. Like, some of them are what you call a randomized control trial, where people are randomly assigned to each group, and it's considered the gold standard of research. However, even those, they don't, it's still, they can't make people follow through with the intervention. And from the ones that I've read, the ones I'm familiar with, and I'm pretty familiar with the area, is that there's often, it's really unclear who actually used the intervention. Now, we know that attrition rates from sleep training studies can be quite high, because people don't like doing it once they get into it, and they go, actually, this isn't for me, I want to stop. And so the main studies that I've looked at, and the ones that are referenced really, really often by people claiming that sleep training isn't harmful, drawing that conclusion from the way that they ran the research isn't appropriate, because they haven't been able to obtain who actually sleep trained and who didn't. And they're assuming that when they were allocated to a group, that they actually went through with the intervention, which is not going to be true in a lot of cases. The other thing is that often the control group, and I'm thinking of a couple in particular here, the control group was something like a sleep education group, not specifically sleep training, but it is in a place that where sleep training is the dominant culture, is the main advice given. And so there's one I'm thinking of that was a 5-year follow-up, and they instructed the nurses of the intervention group to basically give advice about controlled crying. And then they instructed the nurses of the other one in no particular way. They just said they were free to give sleep advice. Those nurses will have had training, because they were maternal child health nurses. Their normal advice for sleep would be based in sleep training. So a lot of those people in the control group still got sleep training advice, not even talking about how they're still existing in a society for that entire time that pushes sleep training. So to think that just because they weren't allocated to an intervention group and given specific controlled crying advice when their baby was 6 months old means that they did not sleep train is a huge leap to make. And that's what, even the authors of this particular paper make that leap and say this means sleep training doesn't harm attachment and socio-emotional development. And I read it and I went, but you don't know what any of these parents did. And it's very likely that some parents in the control group sleep trained, some didn't. Some parents in the intervention sleep trained, and some didn't. So we've got two groups that are exactly the same in terms of their actual experience, but we're trying to say that one is this and one is that. There's no difference between the groups, so that means sleep training doesn't harm attachment. No, it means the groups are the same. So they have this and the averages are probably going to end up the same. I hope I explained that
You did.
clearly.
You did.
And that's it. So that's just one paper, but there's a lot that have similar issues where it's just not appropriate. The methodology is not robust enough to draw an outcome either way. And also not even long-term enough, even 5 years. So that's the longest term one we have looking at sleep training specifically. But, there's not necessarily going to be evidence of, long-term maybe emotional harm at 5 years old. Like
Or
it can take a long time for those sorts of things to show up, like mental health conditions and things. They're a lot more commonly emerge around adolescence and adulthood, but it doesn't mean that everything that didn't happen in our lives that led to that point either buffered against that possibly happening or contributed to the chance that it was going to emerge. At the end of the day, it's always going to be a combination of everything. And it's not saying sleep training is the one thing that is going to ruin or not ruin children, but it's like one part of their experience. And particularly if they're already at risk, then it could definitely be, just contributing to that. And why, I just think like, do we want to take that risk?
right. And the other thing is we don't have anything studying how afraid these little ones are alone in the dark, or how they that relationship with their parents. There's just so many missing pieces,
Yeah,
isn't there?
there's so many missing pieces, so many variables.
Yeah.
Uh,
So really
yeah.
all we can look at is what we know is good for
Well,
now.
this is exactly, and that is kind of what it boils down to for me at the end of the day. We know that responding is so good for them, that giving them, that security, that safe place is never going to be a bad thing. And that children do seek independence in time. It is a natural human inclination to seek autonomy. I mean, I'm sure anybody listening who even has a toddler, maybe they're still deeply dependent on you, but there does start to be this sort of moving away when they can, exploring, like, trying to find their place and, fighting even. That's that push pull. But it's yeah, sorry, I lost where I was going with that.
Okay, we were just talking about how there's just not enough evidence to back that, but the positive
Yeah.
side is all there in
Yes,
places.
exactly. Yeah.
So you brought up a few things. Can you tell us really quick what normal sleep expectations are for babies and toddlers?
It is such a wide range, and I think that's one thing to keep in mind is that there's a really wide range of normal. And so we have averages, like we know that a 3-month-old might sleep between an average of 15 and I'm trying to remember now, hours a day. But we also know that there's babies that fall outside of that normal range, and there's nothing wrong with them. And so it's really about looking at your individual baby. And if you're sort of trying to discern if there is a sleep problem, I usually say to look at everything else, not necessarily sleep. Like, how are they going in general? Are they quite happy? Are they developing well? Are they growing? They sort of interacting with you and the world, and all of these other things that sometimes I also find like taking the focus off sleep and putting it on that will be really reassuring to parents, because at the end of the day, if they weren't sleeping properly, then there would be an effect on all of these other parts of their life. And so if everything else is looking really great, then the most likely scenario is baby is getting the sleep that they need. Now, that doesn't mean that it's not, that doesn't mean it's optimal. Like sometimes sleep is not, optimized, and it's still not a problem in the sense that it's causing baby any problems, but it can definitely be a problem for parents because it can often be very at odds with them being able to find enough rest and sleep and, look after their own well-being. And so that's where, you know, really gentle sort of interventions can be useful. And when I say gentle interventions, I'm still only talking about, for example, looking at, their sleep needs, like working out what their sleep needs are, working out if there's a mismatch between what their sleep needs are and how much the parent is expecting, or how much they're, what time they're being put to bed, and whether that's sort of at odds with how much sleep that baby needs and it's impacting their ability to have consolidated sleep. So, yeah, wide range of normal, but essentially in early infancy, a lot of people expect their baby is quite wakeful in early infancy, but they also expect it to steadily get better. Where what can really happen is that it can get steadily better in the newborn period, but then it takes a bit of a nosedive around 4 months because there's a sleep progression, and that's a true sleep progression because the way that they sleep physiologically changes very drastically. And that has effects on what we observe in their behavior. And often that can be quite disruptive for several weeks. And then they might settle back into a pattern that's not quite so bad, but it may not go back to how they were sleeping when they were newborn. It sort of depends. Like some people have really difficult sleep in the newborn period. So I don't like to generalize,
Yeah.
but that's a pretty typical experience, is that they've started sleeping longer stretches, then everything goes sideways, and then it gets a little bit better, but it doesn't go back to how it was before. And they might settle into a cycle of waking around every 2 hours. And that can continue for, the next sort of year to 18 months until kind of around two can actually be pretty common. I find with parents that are, remaining responsive. And often there's potential there for some optimization, some improvement, and you might be able to work towards some 4 hour stretches or 5 hour stretches, or maybe one in the night and 2 hour wakes around that. Other babies will really be insistent on that 2 hour waking cycle, sometimes even a little bit more towards the end of the night. And all of that is really normal, but it's not to take away from how difficult it is or invalidate parents' feelings around, it's a struggle to keep responding. And that's why, I'm always working sort of in two parts. It's like, what's going on for the baby, and is there opportunity there and potential there to tweak some things and maybe get some positive changes. But also we need to consider that this is the best that this baby can do right now. And if that's the case, how are we going to manage and, support you and give you the tools that you need to keep responding in this period of time, because it will get better, but it might take a while.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. I was thinking about a couple of things too. There's just so much to talk about on this subject, but I think that maybe we should finish up our conversation talking about how those unrealistic expectations that you were just trying to clarify can impact the whole sleep training experience. Why we do it. You remember we've talked about this before? Um, how the research shows that sleep training can positively impact our moods, but our moods are affected by unrealistic expectations. So yeah, let's just kind of talk about how it's just kind of a mixed up situation, isn't it? It's just kind of a mess.
Absolutely. So, yeah, this is the thing. The unrealistic expectations are kind of what drive people towards the sleep training. But the sleep training culture is what has caused the unrealistic expectations. So it's really this vicious cycle. And that's kind of how I look at it, where I go, the intervention that needs to happen, or I mean, in my mind, it would be better if it's a prevention, but that's a long way off because, it's a really entrenched kind of expectations that we have around baby sleep that are unrealistic. So in the society that we're in, it really is an intervention of changing those expectations. And it's not saying that you can't do anything to try to improve sleep, or that there's no time that would justify certain interventions, even, sure, depending on the extremity of the situation. But I don't think that we can underestimate the impact that those unrealistic expectations are having on the whole picture. Because when you expect your baby to do X amount of hours of sleep, whether that's uninterrupted, whether that's total amount of sleep during the day that's not realistic for their needs, and that's not happening, and then that's coming back to you're internalizing it. People are making you feel as though you're doing something wrong, you're not trying hard enough, you're not doing what you should be doing as a parent to make your baby sleep the amount that they sleep. Then
You're too
that's really
soft.
damaging.
You just
Sorry.
said, or you're too soft. It's your fault because you're
Yeah,
just too soft. You're too
exactly. All
attached.
these negative things around, if you just didn't let your baby sleep on you, or if you just didn't feed them to sleep, or you didn't do this, or you didn't do that, like, this is all your fault that your baby sleeps this way. I don't think we can underestimate the impact that that's having at the, early stages on parents' mental health, and then them feeling like they need to choose harsher and harsher methods, because there's also this sort of slippery slope, I think, that happens where a lot of the sleep training, you know, suggestions have moved towards, more gentle methods that are still sleep training, but they involve more parent input. That's a whole other conversation, because I'm still not convinced that they're really very different in terms of the experience for the baby. But assuming for a moment that, parents have the best of intentions always. So they think, okay, well, try these gentle methods. I still get to respond. I still get to be present. But then often, it doesn't work. And then they kind of have this decision to make, in a sense. It's like, do they go back to not trying, or do they keep going further? Do they increase the periods of time that they stop responding for? Do they completely withdraw responsiveness and do, full cry it out? And that is that kind of like pipeline, I think, that people go down, because that gentle sleep training is only going to work. Sleep training in general is only going to work for a particular, small, like a narrow set of babies. But even the fact that it works for those babies also then perpetuates the idea it should work for everybody, because, again, we're not sort of being realistic. We're not understanding baby and respecting all these individual babies' needs, and all of those things. And so I think that one of the biggest differences that we can make, and certainly one of the key things I think in the work that I do, is working on those expectations and seeing the impact that that can have in and of itself in improving parent mental health. And it's not the entire picture, because at the end of the day, parents still need more support. They need tools. They need to work out how they're going to approach sleep and still be able to, sort of look after themselves and get enough sleep and all of that. So by no stretch, and particularly in the society that we're in, it can be rather unsupportive, very individualistic, very, not really very supportive, not sort of the village that we need. I'm always very mindful of that. And I definitely don't want to send the message that all you need to do is understand normal infant sleep and everything else will be fine. But I really do think that it's kind of the beginning. And without that, you're always going to be fighting, because you're just, in essence, you're fighting, what's happening, and not able to accept your baby's sleeping patterns and kind of, and who they are and what they need, as the very first thing, or very, very big part of it.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Well, the sleep expectations that I see, I don't know if it's that people are assuming that every other baby sleeps well because people don't talk about it. I feel like that's one piece of the puzzle. Not enough people talk about their sleep deprivation and their sleep issues. You hear it on TV, it's joked about, but most of the time, what I'm seeing from my clients is everyone around them bragging about how great their kid's sleeping, and they feel isolated and they feel like they're the only ones struggling. And then there's this whole cycle that you've been talking about. But in reality, these kids are sleeping better at certain ages, different ages, all over the map. And like if I go to a ladies' night out event, almost every person who stops at my table says, "Oh my gosh, I wish I knew you when my kid was little. Oh my gosh, I need you. I can't get my kid out of my bed." And this is with the older kids or younger kids. And then everyone with babies, they've seemed to accept that their babies are sleeping normal, waking, which is good. But I just think that's just a piece of it, is we need to talk about this more. We need to validate moms more and parents for what they go through and support them and support each other. And I think people will start to understand more what realistic expectations are.
I completely agree with that. And to add to that, and I know it's not always completely simple because there could be more judgment or even fear of, consequence, but being honest with our healthcare professionals as well, because I think it doesn't help that because often, pediatricians and other healthcare professionals are the ones that are also giving out sleep training advice. And people are really scared to tell them how their baby is actually sleeping. And so I think they get a really warped view of what normal is. And then and that's the lens that they're looking at it through. So then when they're talking to other parents and all of their experiences, so, I'm trying to give pediatricians the benefit of the doubt here too. I think everyone is, mostly they have good intentions, but we're not being honest with each other, with our healthcare professionals. And it's this kind of silence about how our babies and children are actually sleeping. And that is that they're waking more than, you think they are. Even someone who says their child sleeps well, they probably wake a bit more than maybe that parent is even, able to kind of admit to themselves. Or, maybe that child comes into their bed at 4 or 5 in the morning and their parent doesn't think of that as being a bed sharer. And so they don't identify with that, and so they don't talk about it. So there's definitely, a bit of just a stigmatization and just not a lot of honesty around how they're actually sleeping. And I think that would help a lot.
Yeah, I think that there is a dynamic that has to change with doctors though, because in the US, it's very, very common to make moms feel like there's something wrong with their baby if they're still waking up at 6 months or 8 months or 10 months. And a lot of times there's a blame placed on mom. It's her fault. And then straight away they go to the cry it out and they act like this is a fix for all babies and it's very easy. So I just really look forward to the doctors being educated, opening their minds to this information, being more supportive of moms so they can be honest. But yeah, you're right. Even like most moms don't want to talk about bed sharing because they're going to get pressure and they feel judged. And, I think that's an important topic to talk about another time because it's going on. It is common,
It
but
is
people do
absolutely going
not,
on in
they,
similar numbers to countries where it's more accepted practice.
Mhm.
It's happening in similar numbers in, your country and my country. It's
Yep.
actually not really that different. It's just the difference is how we talk about it. And I would argue, you know, that it can be less safe in our countries because the education isn't there, because we've decided that it's just inherently unsafe. And yeah, like you said, totally different conversation, but a really, really important one, because it's absolutely happening and you can't stop it from happening. It's human nature.
Yep, and people can get mad at me all they want, but it's something I support because I need to see my clients getting some sleep, like survival mode. But we talk about safety and it just needs to be talked about more. So sounds like we have a
Absolutely.
date for a future conversation.
Sounds
Um,
great.
so thank you, Jessica, for sharing your wisdom and your knowledge with us. This was an incredible discussion. I learned so much from you, and I'm excited that my listeners are getting to learn as well. Can you just tell us really quick where they can find you?
Sure. So the main platform I hang out on is Instagram, and that's at Scientist. Yeah, at Infant Sleep Scientist. And I also have a website, www.infantsleepscientist.com, particularly if you're after some more support, resources, things like that, then that's where you'll find those. But yeah, I would love to see you, have you as part of my community, especially on Instagram. It's really a great community that I've got going there. And yeah.
My listeners are welcome to work with you. Everybody has different fit, and there's plenty of people to go around. So if you have enjoyed Jess and connect with her, like what she teaches, please feel free to look her up at Infant Sleep Scientist on Instagram, and her website is the same. And yeah, I'm glad that you have so many resources for us, all of us, to learn from. Sorry for getting fumbly mouthed. It's just being real. So again, Jess, I'll let you say goodbye real quick. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me, and thanks for listening, everybody.
Thank you, listeners, for being here and spending some time with us today. Please share this episode so that we can educate exhausted parents and support their children. Take care and come back soon. Thank you for listening to the Sweet Slumber podcast, the good, the bad, and the sleep deprived. Ready to understand your child better? Then take the sleep temperament quiz. Reveal your child's sleep nature and unlock the solutions to your exhaustion in just 5 minutes.